Welcome into the Rockies Insider. I'm your Rockies Insider, Patrick Lyons, talking about a giant problem for the Colorado Rockies that may or may not have anything to do with their series in San Francisco on a Sunday when I think a lot of people woke up with mixed emotions. Nuggets win and advance, Avalanche lose, and their season is over. On controversial play, I don't know, but the Rockies are there as they are 6 months of the year, not more when you include spring training, and unfortunately not providing a ton of distraction in the positive front. They were able to win 2 games in a row, that final one to wrap up their series on Wednesday, and then the first one in San Francisco, winning their first game against the Giants at Oracle Park for the first time since 2023. And going for 2 in a row in San Francisco in the same calendar year for the first time since 2018, but unfortunately not able to get that done and not really doing too much on the offensive side. Friday was a 4-0 loss where they were only able to record 3 hits, only 2 of which came against Robbie Ray, who looks like he's back after Tommy John surgery a couple of years ago. He was absolutely cruising. Only one Rocky got into scoring position. Owen Miller ended up walking. Jordan Beck singled. All 3 hits for the Rockies were singles. It felt like one of those games. And why does it always feel that way on a Friday night, too, in San Francisco, where they just weren't going to be able to put anything together? On the pitching side of things, Antonio Senzatella gave up 3 runs in the second inning, and that was really all the Giants were going to need. It felt like in this series that as long as the Giants had a 2 runs or more lead, Colorado was going to struggle to get back some of those runs. You did have 3 more scoreless innings on Friday by the bullpen during that 4-0 loss. Bradley Blaylock getting another start. I think there's a chance he could end up sticking around in this starting rotation, but his second start in the last week during a 6-3 loss to the Giants, where the Rockies got 5 hits. Again, all were singles. Bradley Blaylock, 5 1/3 innings pitched, allowed only 2 hits, walked 2, struck out 4, and allowed 3 runs. Jake Bird unfortunately couldn't get Blaylock out of a jam in that 6th inning, and Bird himself ends up getting charged with 3 runs on a Matt Chapman grand slam, the first home run that the bullpen has allowed in over 70 innings, franchise record. So the bullpen becoming a strength, and this has kind of been a common theme. I know there's been some frustrations like last year with giving up 5, or rather taking 5 losses when giving up a 5-run lead or more in the 9th inning or later. That was really rough, but there were some good stretches. There was some positive play at various points in time. But in 2023, the bullpen was solid. 2022, bullpen was really solid. And Colorado kind of showing that, you know what, that is something that they can do. They really put their minds to it. They always do. But they can actually put together a decent bullpen that can get the job done. Is it going to be deep enough to last the 162-game slog? That's a topic for another day. But right now, with the young relievers that they have in their bullpen and enough of them down in Albuquerque, they can shuttle them back and forth and keep players sharp. So right now is one of those upswings for the bullpen. Let's go into the chat. Joyce Medina saying, Patrick, we appreciate all the coverage. Thank you, Joyce. First-time commenter. Keep those comments coming in. You can also do that after a video is live, or if you're listening to this on the podcast side of things and you don't really do social media that much, go over to YouTube, leave a comment or question. I can get back to that and even bring it up on the podcast. Are there any words to those fans out there losing hope in the team? Yeah, that is a great question. Not necessarily sure that is something that's part of my job, but I will say that, you know, if this team is going to get themselves back to some semblance of relevancy in the next few years, because despite the fact that the Rockies have been saying we're about like 2 years away, they're already now we can see still 3 years away. But even if it is going to be 3 more years, 2028 is when things start to get righted. And maybe that happens at the end of 2027. A lot of the players this season are going to be those that are contributing in 2027 and 2028. Not all of them, but some of them will be. So this is an opportunity to get your hooks in early on a player and say, I knew this player way back when, before they became that all-star or before they became this incredible reliever or a guy that was a solid contributor in the back of their rotation, whatever it may be. So there are those bright spots. And that's one of the things about fandom that's wonderful, that I think even when your team is really bad, you're still able to find those silver linings. And sometimes it might require you looking down in the minor leagues. That's one of the reasons why Blake Street Banner is so successful. Check out their channel and their podcast. In fact, I've got a show on Monday live that I'll be doing with Noah Spyrek from Blake Street Banner. But looking at the minor leagues and saying, hey, this guy could be something. This guy could be a player that's really special. And even if they might not ascend to all-star status, they're a player that has an incredible backstory, an incredible path to the major leagues. And I think that's one of the biggest pieces of following sports and being a fan isn't just the wins and losses, but it's those moments in between. It's sharing those experiences and learning and investing in those players. And it's unfortunate that you can't say, well, I want to go to the ballpark or watch the game at home to try to feel better and get a win. It's about something much more deeper and something that is unfortunately going to require, a lot more patience. Hickster saying, asking about the prospects looking good. It seems like there isn't any direction we can look at to try and turn the team around. It's going to be some patience. It's going to require that. You look at the 2007 squad, and 2009 was a lot different because there were some free agents that were brought in, some more on the veteran side of things, and certainly no big splashes like the Rockies have had in the last 10 years or so. But if you build a core around young players who've had success in the minor leagues, there's some credence that kind of cohesiveness, once you get to the major league level, can pay off because guys are playing for one another and there's a momentum that can be built. And right now, the Rockies have no momentum whatsoever. I mean, you could look at what the Chicago White Sox did last year and losing 121 games, and then their front office went out and was able to trade Garrett Crochet to build up some prospect capital and some momentum for them. And they still have Luis Robert Jr. as this wonderful trade chip. And there's some thinking that, well, they do have a new front office. They do have a new manager, Will Venable, that those things could start to turn around because something is changing. And so you can look and say, well, here's what it was before. Here's what it is now with a different set of people in charge. You can be a little bit more hopeful. And right now, I think there's a lot of Rockies fans that are struggling to be enthusiastic because it's been the same group of people from this entire stretch of what will more likely than not be 3 consecutive years of losing 100 games and 7 consecutive seasons outside of the postseason, which has never happened in Rockies history. 6 has been the most twice. And now we're looking at 7. And you can probably bet, although 2026 is a decent amount of ways away, it might end up going to 8 years. Stephen Cross saying, it might just be me, but Germán Márquez pitched better when he had shorter hair. Could be a thing. Absolutely could be. Let's talk about him because he did end up going on Sunday, went 4 1/3 innings, so got himself at least into the 5th, but allowed 6 hits, didn't walk anyone, but was charged with 5 runs, struck out 3 as the Giants win 9-3. The Giants bats were good when they needed to be. Again, you scored 9 runs, you did something right, but they were 6 for 12 with runners in scoring position. Whereas on the flip side, the Rockies 2 for 8. They left 8 runners on base, whereas the Giants left only 5 on base. The one positive for the offense, they scored 3 runs just as they did on Saturday, but they were able to do it with 3 extra base hits. In fact, 3 triples. I did want to look that up. When was the last time they hit 3 triples in a game away? We know that Coors Field very much can be a triples haven for baseballs, but on the road, and it is at Oracle Park with all of the different textures that are out there in right field with the brick. there is, a much greater likelihood of seeing those kind of triples. But I think this game was a lot more about Logan Webb dominating as being an ace. He's a problem in this division. I think a lot of people don't give him a ton of credit because I don't know that he's got that social media savvy, and he's just a ball player that goes out, does his job. 7 innings, 6 hits, walked 2, and yet despite those 8 base runners, only allowed 1 run, was supported by 2 double plays, struck out 6. But Germán Márquez is the takeaway. I know a lot of fans have been talking about him his last couple starts. And now, through 7 starts to begin this season, this is his worst 7-game start. Or rather, this is his worst 7-game stretch at any point in any single season. A 9.90 ERA. Basically what he's been through his first 6. I went back, crunched the numbers to try and figure out when his worst 7-game stretch of a single season was. And it was in 2022, and it was early on in the year. From late April to the beginning of June, he had a 7.65 ERA. And by the end of the year, he was able to at least get his ERA down below 5. So are we having another case of lightning striking twice? But as a player who's 30 years old, his first full season back after Tommy John, he's also a free agent after this season. So right now, the Rockies are at somewhat of a crossroad in terms of keeping Márquez into the rotation. Is he pitching through something? I'd speculated about that after his last outing. Did say that he had difficulty feeling the baseball, as if, there was something with his circulation, perhaps. Don't know. But now with Bradley Blaylock coming up, being stretched out a little bit, pitching into the 6th inning on Saturday, I think you can rely on him as being a guy that can take the ball every 5 days, and maybe Germán Márquez can go on the IL, figure some things out. There's a lot of players in baseball today in 2025 where they go on the injured list and they may or may not have an injury. Or rather, I should say, they may or may not have an injury worthy of being on the IL, because all players are playing through something. At the end of last year, the final 2 months, Ryan McMahon, he made an audible sound from the other side of the clubhouse every time he sat down and every time he got up because of some of the issues he's been having with his knees. He's on the wrong side of 30 now. So those things happen, and yet he went out and he continued to play each and every day. And sometimes you have to do that when there's no backup, when there's no reprieve, when there's no bench to give you a little bit of extra support. And so Ryan McMahon, really for the last several seasons, has been a guy that's gone out and posted and plays despite maybe not feeling his best. I think a lot of guys do that, but a lot of teams, when they have a lot more depth, they're able to say, hey, I appreciate you going out there and taking the ball every 5 days, or being ready to pitch out of the bullpen just about every single day, or playing anywhere in the outfield and running around and burning who knows how many calories. But you know what? We're going to put you on the IL for 10 to 15 days and give you a little bit of break to regenerate just a little bit, catch your breath figuratively, and then come back and be even sharper. But while you're gone, don't worry, we do have a worthy replacement. The Rockies' depth just has not been there. And even now, despite the fact that they've got some big names in AAA, some really good prospects that might take some time for them to gain traction and, be everyday players for the Rockies. It took Michael Tolley a while. Despite that positivity, there's no depth that can help immediately, no big league depth, so to speak. And you look back, and I've been saying it for a while. In 2021 and 2022, the Colorado Rockies made one trade at the MLB trade deadline. They traded Michael Givens in 2021, and they were the only team in Major League Baseball that did nothing in 2022. In 2021, even when they actually made a move, I believe it was, I don't want to put a name on it, but there was a former GM. No, it was Jim Bowden. I'm fairly certain. I believe it was Jim Bowden, former GM of the Reds, saying that it was malpractice for a team as bad as the Rockies, who had just recently traded away Nolan Arenado, for them to not go out and try to improve their future, live to fight another day. And unfortunately, those 2 years cost Colorado a lot. And you look at what they did in 2023, And there's a lot of players that are contributing to this team right now, and they still haven't fully gained their traction. Bradley Blaylock was a guy that just came in 2024, but Vodnik came in at 2023 trade deadline, and he's still figuring things out as a big leaguer. He's off to a good start, certainly, but it's going to take some time for that to happen. Tanner Gordon, another one of those guys. So despite that activity in 2023, you're really not even seeing the fruits of the labor at those trade deadlines 2 years later. Maybe by the second half you will, but it's going to take 2+ years for any trades, any deals that you might make at the trade deadline to help you out and contribute. It's not true all the time. It's not true across the board with all 30 teams. But for a lot of them, that's how it runs down. And when I talk about the Detroit Tiger series, you're going to see some of the shrewd deals that they made over time to recognize, hey, we're not good, so we might as well make a trade to improve our future, to try to get a little bit better, because the writing's on the wall. We don't have it right now, and I don't think we're going to just magically get it in 1 year or maybe even 2 years. So waving that white flag can be a positive thing. And the Rockies didn't do that for 2 years, and they're still feeling it from them. And so Germán Márquez, what do you do with him now with a 9.90 ERA to start his season? I think you can find a way to keep Bradley Blaylock in this rotation, and you may need to go get more starting pitching. And there's some that's out there, some former Rockies, in fact, that are out there, but you might need some more starting pitching. Tanner Gordon has been suitable. He's been fine in AAA, but beyond that, you're going to have to give someone an opportunity. You're going to have to add a Carson Palmquist to the 40-man roster and give him the ball. Maybe Gabriel Hughes is that guy. I'll talk about the conversation that Hughes had with myself and a handful of other folks in the Denver media, as he was one of 2 organizational players of the month for April, the first month of the minor league season. But the options that you have are not anything that's going to make you feel totally confident that there's going to be a major upgrade, because there's just going to be growing pains. When it comes to these young guys, there are growing pains. Like that can be part of it. There's not a ton of players that can hit the ground running and be really good immediately. It can be very much a rarity. And it's been a while since the Rockies have had a player that hit the ground running. Trevor Story did it in 2016. You can argue Nolan Arenado did it really well in 2013. I think Ezequiel Tovar in some ways was able to do that in his first full season in 2023, yet still not quite an all-star, but you like what he was able to do at 21 years old. So you require some patience, but it does require some planning, which is what a lot of folks like Jeremy and Joyce, Hickster, Steven saying in the chat over on the YouTube side of things. Now, April is over, and The Athletic, despite the fact that they don't have anybody on the ground here in Denver to cover the Rockies, since they unfortunately let Nick Groke go, who did a wonderful job covering the Rockies for both The Athletic and before that, the Denver Post. Just incredible work. Somebody that I always loved reading and learned a couple things from along the way. So a big shout out to him. But, Saris looked at Colorado and what was quite possibly the worst month ever in the history of baseball. I'll talk a little bit more about that with Noah Spyrek live over on the Blake Street Banner channel on YouTube. That's why one of the reasons why you want to make sure that you are also following on social media so you can get those notifications at Patrick D. Lyons or at Rockies_insider. But, Sarah saying it wasn't really the worst month ever. Now, it's in the conversation, but it wasn't a no doubt worst month of the season. He did add that right now, if the season were over, they'd be the worst park adjusted offense and the worst league adjusted offense in modern baseball history. So this offense that has already gotten rid of one hitting coach, and we've seen less strikeouts with the new one, we're not seeing a ton more of run production. Chad Jennings also writing that, quote, "There's a lot about the Rockies that speaks for itself at the moment. The team has existed for 33 years, and rarely have the Rockies been particularly good, but never had they been especially awful until now. And that's rough. That's certainly rough to deal with. And for all the fans looking for a reason to get excited, again, it's more about the small victories and the individual players, what they've been able to contribute and what they might be able to contribute. Look, I'm not sure how many of you are into horse racing or at least just get involved in it for the Kentucky Derby. But I used to be into horse racing a little bit. There was a racetrack by my house where I grew up in New Jersey. And so it's a lot of fun. Ended up going up to Cheyenne. There's like a casino in Cheyenne, like pretty close to the Colorado border. And there was a lot of people in a pretty small casino with their crazy Kentucky Derby hats and whatnot. And I bring that up because it does have a baseball tie-in. Not sure if you watch, but former Phillies outfielder and all-star, one-time all-star, Jason Worth had a horse in the Kentucky Derby down in Louisville, Churchill Downs. It was Flying Mohawk. I actually bet on Flying Mohawk just because why not? I didn't want to go with the chalk, which did not end up winning. And it was fun to watch, but it did make me think, and I've talked about this before on previous podcasts, that post-retirement, a lot of players, they search for something to do, which can be very common. Apparently, Jason Worth was dabbling in organic farming, which is something that Jake Plummer with his mushrooms has been known to do. Former Broncos quarterback thought about buying a 300-acre plot of land in Illinois. But he wanted something competitive. He wanted to stay competitive without maybe actually doing the competition. And you say, well, how is he able to afford the sport of kings with only hitting 229 career homers, most of which came once he reached his age 29 season and beyond? And again, being only a one-time all-star, but he was a client of Scott Boras. And in his season before becoming a free agent, had a 4.5 WAR season in 2010. Also was a part of those Phillies teams that was going to the playoffs every year, went to the World Series twice, ended up winning one World Series in 2008. And at that time, the Nationals, they needed some battle-tested players. And with Steven Strasburg on his way, he was the number 1 overall pick in 2009. And with the upcoming number 1 pick in 2010, that was going to be Bryce Harper. Everybody knew that at the time. Washington was able to pony up, no pun intended, a 7-year, $126 million deal for Jason Worth. And believe it or not, Worth did tell The Athletic that if he were to win the Kentucky Derby, it would be over everything. That would be the highlight of his life, he said, if his horse, Flying Mohawk, actually won the Derby. It did not. It finished second to last. Yes, it was the penultimate horse. Great word. There's last, and then there's penultimate, just before last place. So Alex Bregman is a guy who's owned horses, still does. I know he owned about 8 a few years ago, but he's a part of Bregman Family Racing, and he was actually able to convince a friend of his by the name of Walker Buehler, who's now a teammate of his on the Red Sox. One was on the Astros, one was on the Dodgers. Now they're together in Boston. They actually co-own a horse. Victor Martinez and Hall of Famer Joe Torre have owned horses in the past. Johnny Damon, Paul Lo Duca, a couple old-timer names from the early 2000s. They've also been involved in horse racing. Lux in the chat before we wrap this one up. Marquez and CJ Cron were the only good players Jeff Bridich brought in. Bridich did make a shrewd deal there ahead of the 2016 season, where he was able to trade Corey Dickerson and a big prospect at the time in Kevin Padlow to bring in Jake McGee, who was good for a little while, and he certainly was good at the point that they acquired him before he became a free agent, and Germán Márquez. So they were able to poach Marquez from the Tampa Bay Rays. One of the few trades where team got something over on the Tampa Bay Rays. So, Jeff Bridich, for as much of the knock that he does get for how everything blew up, and that certainly is a big deal, and that is going to be part of the story of talking about the time in which he led the Rockies. You can't overlook the fact that he's been the only general manager to navigate this team to 2 consecutive playoff appearances. And you could argue that for close to 3 years, the Rockies were a playoff team. If you want to take the last half or maybe even the last 2 months of 2016, when Walt Weiss was still the manager, the 2 years in which they did make the playoffs in 2017 and 2018, and then the first 3 months of 2019 when they were in position for the final NL wildcard, you could say 3 years they were a playoff contender. And so when you tell the story of Jeff Bridich, you do need to make sure that you do that. Rockies Insider with me, Patrick Lyons, your Rockies Insider. You didn't vote me, but I just kind of took it over. This is more like a kingdom. So I'm running the ship. I'm going to talk about the organizational players of the month and Gabriel Hughes and Jared Thomas. Preview this Tigers series Tuesday, rain out, bad weather, doubleheader. We've kind of been through this all over again. It's that time in the month of May. There's some Rockies that have been on the move, bouncing around. And of course, I want to answer any questions that you might have over on the YouTube side of things. I appreciate everyone who's sending that they would vote for me. But again, if it's a kingdom, you have to say that or I will expel you from the kingdom. So really, until it's truly a democracy, we'll see how this goes. But organizational players of the month, it was really cool a few days ago talking with Gabriel Hughes and Jared Thomas. Gabriel Hughes doing big things in his first full season coming back from Tommy John surgery with the Double-A Hartford Yard Goats, a 2.08 ERA in 5 starts. Now, only 21 2/3 innings pitched, but because this is his first full season back from Tommy John, which he had back in summer of 2023, there is a bit of an inning limit for him. So they're taking it very cautious as he is a part of their future. That's been a question of what do we look forward to for this team? Well, there are guys that are in the system now that will contribute to the next Rockies contender. You have to be patient. You have to keep an eye on them in the minors. Do a little bit of extra homework. You got to do some of those things. But the biggest piece that I like from what Gabriel Hughes has been able to do isn't just the 17 strikeouts and 21 2/3 innings pitched, because that is less than 1 per inning, or it's less than 9 strikeouts per game, but it's the 4 walks. So he's filling up the zone and he's missing bats simultaneously, and he's not getting beaten for those strikes that he's throwing with that 2.08 ERA as a 0.88 whip, which as of the end of last week, it ranked 6th in the Eastern League, while that 2.08 ERA ranked 8th. Now, whip is a stat that doesn't really get thrown around a ton. I think a lot of people do know what it is. In case you don't, that is walks plus hits divided by innings pitched. In other words, how many guys are you allowing on base per inning? And so if you can be under 1, that means, you're not even allowing 1 runner per inning. So that's a really, really nice thing. In the chat, I really like Gabriel Hughes. He looked amazing in spring training. I would agree to that. And was drafted in the first round, just like Dollander. Him and Dollander can be a really good duo for years to come. I think so. Hughes is a player that needs to be added to the 40-man roster this winter, or else he will get exposed to the Rule 5 draft. And I think he is one of those players. There's a lot. There's a lot on that list, and I've written a little bit about that. I've talked about it on the Rockies Insider podcast, but if you're looking for more of the written form, make sure you're getting yourself signed up to the Rockies Insider newsletter over on Substack, patrickdelyons.substack.com. It's absolutely free. That'll just drop into your inbox. And I wrote about, look, I don't think there's enough room for those guys. And so that's where the Rockies in the past should have been created the last couple of years. But certainly at this year's trade deadline, you could see them trade a prospect or 2 in order to get back a little bit more in a trade. So if you're trying to get rid of an expiring contract like a Germán Márquez or an Austin Gomber, 2 guys that frankly their value right now in early May isn't a ton, but all it takes is 4 or 5 really good starts before the trade deadline where maybe you can cash in and say, well, these guys probably aren't going to be around going forward. They do have some value. They are looking forward to free agency because they are right there. Well, you know what? If we include one of our prospects, Now the prospect coming back to us is going to be even more. And that prospect doesn't need to be added to the 40-man roster until next year. So you're not kicking the can down the road so much as you're balancing things out, because some of the guys that you do expose in the Rule 5 draft, they could end up getting poached by another team. So you might as well try to get something for nothing, which is a strategy that the Rockies have not employed, as much as maybe they should have in the past. But talking with Gabriel Hughes, he's a very thoughtful and insightful young man. He's a player that, hasn't really been bothered by the fact that he does have an innings limit and that he does have to scale things back just a bit as the Rockies do monitor his 2025 season. But the whole Tommy John surgery in the last 2+ years has really taught him a lot about resiliency and the importance of it in this sport. He doesn't see the last 2 years as a setback, but rather as an opportunity for him to learn. He's a very smart young man. And, he was able to acknowledge, and I think a lot of people do know, especially if you're listening to the Blake Street Banner, they do talk about that a lot. And that was, certainly one of the things that when you talk to minor league folks, they tell you that, as flashy as the numbers can be in low A or high A, you really don't know how good a player is going to be. You really don't know how much they're going to be able to persevere the typical challenges of being a professional athlete until you reach AA. It's the hardest jump in baseball, and Gabriel Hughes acknowledged that. Now, he's having success this year, but it didn't come right away for him. So that is a major jump. And sure, the jump from the AAA to the majors can be a really hard one, but it's not the same shock to the system for a lot of young players who they've always been the best player in their town or the best player at their college or one of the best. And all of a sudden, you have the elite of the elites in AA, whether it's the Eastern League, whether it's the Texas League, or the Southern League. There are actually 3 AAs, believe it or not. But that jump from high A to AA can be huge. And right now, Gabriel Hughes is definitely having tons of success. His fastball right now is currently sitting between 92, 94. Slider is his probably, the biggest go-to pitch that he can lean on, but he's working on the changeup as his 4th pitch because he knows that's something that he's going to need to be truly effective and quite possibly to be truly effective at Coors Field. Now, my final 2 questions that I had for Gabriel was, number 1, he mentioned visualization and doing visualization during the conversation with a handful of folks from the Denver media, and talked about having a mental performance coach. It's actually the same one as Chase Dolander. You can check him out, Brian Cain, Cain. You can go to his website and see some of the ideas and some of the things that he does working with clients, because that's a mental edge that you can have with that positive thinking. And those mental performance coaches, they do end up getting results. And the final one I had to ask him, which is an interesting thing. I don't know if I mentioned this during spring training, but I asked him, what are you reading? Because I saw Gabriel, not Gabe, by the way, don't call him that. I did read that somewhere. Don't call him Gabe, Gabriel. I saw him reading a book in the clubhouse at spring training, and I've never seen a player read a book ever. Now, have they read an article maybe on their phone? Could be, but I'm not really looking at players' phones. Sometimes they're on them. Sometimes they're reading a scouting report, so they've got the papers that they're looking at, or they're watching video. But I've never seen anyone reading a book before until Gabriel Hughes. He was reading The Smartest Guys in the Room about the Enron scandal during the early 2000s. Some of you might know it. Some of you might not. One fun baseball fact you may not know is that Minute Maid Park in Houston, which is now called Dakin Park, it was originally, when it opened in 2000, it was originally named Enron Field. And it stayed that way for about 2 years and a little bit more. Early in 2002, when the whole Enron scandal went down, they removed that name. And I didn't realize that it was Astros Field from February of 2002 until July of 2002, when they struck a deal with Minute Maid, and it became Minute Maid Park for the next 22 years. So I asked Gabriel about what books he was reading, and he said he was reading the Steve Jobs biography written by Walter Isaacson, which I had on my shelf, and I've only got about halfway through. I had to stop reading it for personal reasons. I'll leave it at that. But And then he said, "Oh, and I got the Walter Isaacson biography on Leonardo da Vinci on deck." So he's somewhat of a voracious reader, which is refreshing to see. So once he's up in the majors, it'll be fun talking books with a player. I can't say that I've ever had those kind of conversations before. While the Innocent asking, have the Rockies had any success picking up Rule 5 players? Not too much. That's something that they typically have never leaned into a ton. And, there hasn't been a ton of teams that have had that success. Yes, there are players that have been Rule 5 draft picks. I mean, the most famous, of course, is Roberto Clemente. I mean, he's a Hall of Famer. He was actually a prospect with the Brooklyn Dodgers. And that was at a time where they can have upwards of like 20 minor league teams. And there were some scouts that kind of heard about him, and the Dodgers tried to hide him, leave him on the bench. But the Pirates folks, they did their job. Shane Victorino is one. Johan Santana is a guy that has a little bit of a Hall of Fame pedigree. He could end up being a Rule 5 pick Hall of Famer. So there have been a decent amount. Tommy Kahnle is one that we're seeing right now, or going to see, in the Detroit Tigers. He is back. He was a Rule 5 pick. Jordan Sheffield in 2021, who the Rockies were able to poach from the Dodgers, and he had a good year and then kind of disappeared. And frankly, I never followed up like where he went. He's just kind of gone, but he had himself a good year. And I really think that's it. Like literally just two guys. Maybe there's a third that I'm thinking of, Luis A. Gonzalez, perhaps. But no, the Rockies just unfortunately haven't had a lot of luck, but they also just typically don't use their Rule 5 picks on players. They've had a lot better luck drafting players for other teams and then trading them. Kevin Kelly was one of them from Tampa a couple years ago. He's still in the majors, still contributing for the Rays. Mark Canha is probably one of the biggest ones that they drafted from out of the Marlins system, and then immediately traded Mark Canha to the Oakland A's. How the Rule 5 draft worked, it's a strange draft where the only reason that the Rockies took Mark Canha was because the A's said, we will give you something for your pick, and you can't trade those picks. But if you draft this guy, we will then give you something for him. So that's essentially how that went down. I think it might have been Austin House. Maybe that was who they got for Mark Canha. Don't quote me on that one. So they've had much better luck drafting players and then trading them to another team. Hickster saying, who are the people we're looking at potentially trade? That's a topic for another day, but typically guys that are going to be free agents at the end of the year, which there's not a ton, or players that have a club option for next year. Because if you're not going to pick up the club option on the player and another team is going to give you something for that guy, you can make that trade. But the Rockies, I don't know if this is more of an exception to the rule. I think it is, but they were creative at last year's trade deadline. GM Bill Schmidt, I will give him credit for being creative, because of all the guys that seemed like they were going to be on the trade block, Nick Mears was not one of them. And yet Bill Schmidt was able to trade a guy like Nick Mears that had at least 3 years of service time left. I think it might have even had 4 more years of club control. So it was 2024 and then 3 more years after that. So it wasn't a player that was a free agent. It was a young arm, older young arm, but a less experienced arm that had some good upside. But the Rockies, unfortunately, just didn't see things working out for him. So you know what? Instead of waiting for the offseason and dumping him or non-tendering him or designating him for assignment, they were actually able to bring back something good in Bradley Blaylock, and a prospect that unfortunately had to get shut down and get Tommy John surgery. But they got a little bit creative. So that does suggest that it's not just going to be players that are free agents or even players that are 2 years away. It could be something more than that. And I would certainly argue that because the Rockies do feel very far away from getting back into contention, keeping a player that is going to be a free agent beyond 2026 or becoming a free agent after 2027 is probably a player that's not really a part of your future. It's part of your near future, but not a part of your next contending team. And if they're not going to be a part of your next contending team, there becomes less of a reason to keep that player around. And that's something that has been really, really challenging for the Rockies to come to grips with. And it's something that's hurt them, frankly, a lot. Not trading players when their stock is highest and recognizing and looking in the mirror that, you know what, we're not good right now. We're not going to be good in the next couple of years. So holding on to this player isn't going to really help us do much of anything. Maybe it's going to help us avoid 100 losses. Right now, I don't think there's any player you could say that about. So being a little bit more aggressive on the trade front this year is certainly something that I'm going to be discussing on the Rockies Insider in maybe a couple weeks' time, because the Mike Moustakas trade in 2023 was on the aggressive side. Didn't have a ton of upside, but you know what? He was playing well at the time as a decent left-handed bench bat. But that was one of the first trades of the trade deadline, and it was over a month before the trade deadline. Realizing that, look, we're not going to contend right now, and if another team is going to pay a premium on a player, because instead of getting that player as a rental for the final 2 months of the season, for August and September, well, if you're going to trade this player at the end of June or even early July, now we're getting this player for 3 months. So we might pay a little bit more. And there's less options that are around. So you know what? We need something right now. So we'll take that. Now, that does wave a white flag, and that does communicate something to the fan base. But if the object of a baseball season is to win a championship, and you're not going to do it this year, you're not going to do it in 2026, you're probably not going to do it in 2027, you want to make moves to allow you to increase the likelihood of winning a championship or even getting back to the postseason in 2028. So you're waving a white flag on now, but increasing the likelihood that you won't have to do that in 3 years' time. If the Rockies had done that in 2021, they wouldn't have to wave the white flag 4 years later. We are now 4 years past 2021 when they didn't wave that white flag at the trade deadline. So you've got to learn from those kind of things. Jeff in the chat saying, we have no value to sell anywhere on our team right now. There's a lot of guys struggling for sure. I think there are still pieces out there that, again, right now, no one trades anybody at this time of year, unless you're the Marlins. And when they traded Luis Ariz this time last year, that was, look, that's the Padres, that's the Marlins. There are definitely the exceptions to the rule. But I think given a month's time, there are going to be players that have value. And when you consider the fact that there are now 3 wild cards, there's a lot of teams in contention, which means there's very few teams that are out of contention. So there are less options available in making trades. Now, 2 contending teams can get creative and make trades. That's a good old-fashioned baseball trade. Those things still do happen. But if you're just looking to cherry pick the best players off of a team that's struggling as poorly as the Rockies, sometimes that becomes easier to do. So while I would agree, Jeff, in theory that right now there's a lot of guys that you can't really sell high on. I mean, you're not trading Jordan Beck. You're not trading Hunter Goodman. Like, if those are the 2 guys that you're going to sell high on, Brenton Doyle, you're not really going to trade right now. And Ezekiel Tovar is on the IL, but you're not going to trade high on those guys exactly at all this season. So I do agree that it's going to take a little bit of time before you can possibly figure those things out. In the chat, so by 2028, should Tolia, Doyle, Beck, Veen, and Tovar, they should all be in their prime. Dolander too. Essentially, yeah, they will be in their prime. Brendan Rodgers in his prime, how much was he able to contribute? Not a ton. And that's another thing that the Rockies need. They need some stars. They need some really great players to break out, and they don't have that just yet. They're waiting for Tovar and Doyle, and they might not get there. They might end up being those really solid 4-win players, and that's okay. But if you're not going to be able to sign superstar players that can be 5.5, 6 wins and above, because you've been shell-shocked by Chris Bryant and players in the past, and you're not going to trade your prospect capital for some big name guys that are already hard to get, you have to develop them. You have to draft and develop well, and you also have to cherry pick from other organizations like you did with Germán Márquez ahead of the 2016 season. It's a rarity. It's hard to do, but you can get creative. The White Sox were desperate enough to trade a player who I'm 99% sure had yet to even make his professional debut because he was an international signing. They were that desperate that the White Sox acquired James Shields for a package of players that included Fernando Tatis Jr. Go back and look. Yeah, he came up through the Padres minor league system, but he was traded by the White Sox. He signed with Chicago and was dealt for James Shields. Now, the Rockies, that's a lottery ticket that I don't know they'll be able to cash in or take advantage of. But you got to try. You got to try something like that. Jared Thomas, the second of the two organizational players of the month. He was great for High A Spokane. He slashed 352, 472, 534. So batting average is high. On base percentage just below 500 or just below 50%. He's getting on base, and a slug above 500. He did that with 4 home runs and hitting safely in 19 of 23 games, reaching base in 22 of 23 games. At the time of the award, he led the NWL in both hits and RBI with 19. Pretty impressive when you're the leadoff hitter. And he was second in average and in total bases. He is a true hitter. He is a leadoff hitter. It's something he's been doing since he was 14, 15 years old. And he called himself that. He called himself a true hitter, more than a power hitter, despite hitting for power. It's kind of like Corbin Carroll. He can hit for power, but he's more of a guy who can get on base, wreak some havoc. When it comes to steals, Thomas 5 for 6 in stolen base attempts. But it's about getting on base and utilizing his skills. So yeah, he's gonna stretch some singles into doubles, doubles into triples, but he's not a power hitter. He's a true hitter, and his objective is to get on base. It's what he loves to do. He's been getting much better now in his second year as a pro, but it's still his first full season as a professional, getting much better about being patient, accepting his walks, picking his spots to break out, especially with those stolen bases. In fact, a little over a week ago, he was a double shy of a cycle in a game where he had 2 walks. Now, granted, he did get a triple in his final plate appearance. So yeah, he was a double away from the cycle, and he took 2 walks, and they were really earlier in the game, but still, it's an important thing to note that he's doing it in all facets of the game when he comes to the plate. He's never hitting for the cycle. He has never hit for the cycle before. College, high school, anything. I think that's going to change at some point in the next 2 years while he's down in the minors. In Spokane, the 2 guys he said he's been talking to and connecting and communicating with the most, Skylar Messenger, who's a Colorado kid, who's done a really good job as a late round pick, but a contributor at every level in the minors, and Charlie Condon, who is out and is looking to get himself back maybe by the end of May, beginning of June. I talked about Charlie Condon just a couple days ago. Make sure you check out some of those old editions of the Rockies Insider. A week ago is old. Well, with how fast news travels around these parts when it comes to baseball. I mean, it's every single day. I mean, yeah, it is old news. Now, one of the bigger questions that, not a bigger question, but certainly an interesting and notable one is, what's his future position going to be? Because he was a player that at the University of Texas, a guy who worked closely with Skylar Messenger. They were teammates there in Austin, but also Troy Tulowitzki. That's going to be one of those interesting storylines going through with Skylar Messenger and Jared Thomas as a top prospect. By the time they get to the Rockies, and even when they do get to the Rockies, there'll be a lot of conversation about Troy Tulowitzki and his post-playing career and contributing to the Longhorns and the growth of players like a Jared Thomas. That's going to be fun. And maybe that's what opens the door and maybe can help repair some of the issues, frankly, that Tulo, rightfully so, has with the Rockies, who made a handshake deal and say, don't worry, we're not going to trade you. Jeff Bridich traded him because he wasn't the man who shook Tulowitzki's hand. He wasn't the general manager at the time. So Tulo, hard feelings, and rightfully so. Rightfully so. But Jared Thomas he's an outfielder, really. Like, he's got the first baseman's mitt in the bag, but I don't see him as being one of those players. If you can't defend anywhere else, you end up at first base. That's typically how it goes. There's not a ton of first base minor league prospects. Nick Kurtz of the A's, sure. We've seen him come up, but he's more of the exception to that rule. So he can defend in center and in left. So that's really going to be, his position going forward. Skyler went to your high school. Fantastic. Was it Niwot? I thought he might have gone to Niwot High School, just north of Boulder. That's pretty neat. In the chat, how bad were the Rockies in 2013, 14, and 15, and early 2016 to get the 17, 18 success seasons that got them to the playoff appearances? Well, what's interesting, I've talked about this before, from 2012 to 2015, the Rockies, who were trying to be good, they were trying to put a contender on the field. They only lost one more game than the Chicago Cubs from 2011 to 2014, a team that was actively tanking. And while the Rockies were trying to be good, they only ended up winning one more game. And we're seeing that now too. They are trying to put a good product on the field. They're certainly paying for it. They're not at the bottom of the league in terms of payroll, and yet they're going to have 300 losses in 3 years' time. So a lot of those guys in 2017, 2018 did come from the drafts that had a lot to do with the 12 through 15 run. And so they benefited from picking high every year. And the Rockies have been picking high every single year, except those players just haven't really been coming to fruition. The drafting has been well. The developing has been the thing that has held this team back from having a 17, 18 quality of a team. And that's been one of the biggest things. Tulo was on Sunday Night Baseball tonight. Oh, he was? I did not see this, talking about how he worked with Mookie this offseason. That's also very interesting. I did not know that yet. Troy Tulowitzki, you know what? Second career as a coach. Not every player wants to do that. Not every player can communicate that. I mean, Barry Bonds, I don't think he was a very good hitting coach for the 1 year that he was with the Marlins, because Barry Bonds just had the God-given talent. I mean, he was the son of a big leaguer. That certainly helped. So him going out and doing things to him was easy. It's like, just do that. He would talk about like pitches, and he's like, just put the bat on the ball. I think he said, quote, I try to catch the ball with the bat. So go ahead and do that. Now, I think he had some success working with Christian Yelich at the time, but I don't know a ton of other guys have actually been able to translate the things that they learned with Barry Bonds that 1 year with the Marlins. Now, the Tiger series, the weather has been obviously wreaking havoc, and the Chase Dollander Jackson Jobe matchup was like a total wow. And I looked this up because I didn't know at the time. Jackson Jobe, 3rd overall pick to Detroit in 2021. In 2023, Dollander to the Rockies, 9th overall. But Jobe, before he was taken 3rd by the Tigers, he was actually committed to Ole Miss. So we could have had a Jobe-Dollander matchup first in 22 and 23 as a prime SEC matchup between Ole Miss and Tennessee. Would have been cool. Kyle Freeland and Casey Mize, Antonio Senzatella, Tarek Skubal. We'll see if Skubal ends up going with a lot of the chaos that the weather has wreaked. But what else about the Detroit Tigers? Well, Tommy Kahnle returning. Since the start of 2018, he's been back to Coors Field once since pitching for the Rockies, and that was 2 appearances with the Yankees in 2023. Javier Baez, he's now a center fielder. Kenta Maeda is gone. He was designated for assignment last week. They've got 11 players at the end of the weekend, 11 players that was on the injured list, and yet they still manage to not only be relevant, but also be very good. That is one of the things that some teams will point to and say, well, we've had some injuries and who knows how good we could have been. Sure, but you do need depth to step up from behind. And so the Tigers, I did not have them go into the postseason this year. I had the Guardians winning the division and the Royals making it as a wild card from the Central, but the Tigers continuing with that momentum that allowed them to surge into the postseason at the end of last year. And I imagine on the broadcasts, they'll talk about how the Tigers were able to build their team, and a good amount of their best players have come through via the draft, lots of first rounders, all of which have worked out to varying degrees. Spencer Torkelson certainly could be better or could have been better, but he's finally turning things around this season. You also got first rounders in Riley Green, Jace Young, Casey Mize. Took a while for him to get things going, and Jackson Jobe. All those guys, first rounders, and we're talking about them. Can't say that exactly about the Rockies right now in their roster being comprised of those first round picks. But the Tigers have also made a lot of shrewd trades in the last few years. The shortstop Trey Sweeney, they acquired in the Jack Flaherty deal with the Dodgers. And yet they were able to re-sign Jack Flaherty, something that some people in Denver that they used to talk a lot on the podcast side. They don't really do it anymore. Told me, oh, that's an impossibility. You can't trade Story or John Gray and then re-sign them. No, you can. You can. The Tigers did it. A lot of teams have done those things. But a really shrewd deal to pick up Trey Sweeney from the Dodgers and a really good catching prospect in Tyron Lorenzo. Justin Henry Malloy came over for an above-average reliever. Chase Lee in the bullpen came over for Andrew Chafin at just last year's trade deadline. He was a 6th-round pick in 2021 by the Rangers. Reese Olson came over in a deal that sent Daniel Norris out. 2 months, a 2-month rental of Daniel Norris for Reese Olson, a middle-of-the-rotation starter for the Tigers. And then Zach McKinstry, you might remember him from his time with the Dodgers. He did come in a trade with the Cubs at the end of spring training. And Tyler Holton was a great waiver acquisition by the from the Diamondback. So this is how you get players, not just drafting and developing, but doing a lot of those other things right. Finally, some ex-Rockies on the move. I want to talk about Ty Block signed a minor league deal with Texas. Brent Suter, when I talked to him when the Reds were in town, mentioned that Block and Suter had gotten together during the visit to Denver, and that he was on the comeback trail and trying out with some teams. So he's working. He worked out through those things. He is now with the Rangers, which would explain why it took him a little while to get signed. May 1st, he finally gets his deal. Brian Shaw signed a minor league deal with the Seattle Mariners. Brian Shaw still doing it at age 37. His last year with the Rockies, he was only 31 years old, still kicking around, contributing, playing baseball. Good for him. Jose Urania didn't have a very long tenure with the Rockies. He was designated for assignment by the Mets, opted for free agency, only had 1 start this year with the Mets, 3 innings pitched, allowed 5 runs, spent all of 2024 with the Rangers, and the rest of 2023, after the Rockies dropped him, he was with the White Sox after those 5 really bad starts for Colorado. Chris Flexen was promoted after being outstanding in AAA. In fact, he was solid for the White Sox last year. He did have a 4.95 ERA, but was worth 1.6 wins above replacement. So it's utterly wild to me to think that Urania and Flexen were a part of the first 100-loss team in Rockies history. And here we are 2 years later, and nothing has really changed, except the roster for the Rockies is just a little bit younger. Chasen Shreve, 1 game with the Rockies last year. He rejected an assignment to the minors with Atlanta, so I believe he's a free agent now. So those guys are still kicking around. I don't expect them to come back in the purple pinstripes, but it's interesting keeping tabs on those guys who it seemed like maybe their career was on the way out. You know, it's Rockies can be that last team for a lot of players on their way out, looking for an opportunity to play, but some of them still kicking around and doing their things. Good for them. Good for them. Good for you for sticking around. I appreciate that momentum you've given me. Give me some more momentum on the social media at Patrick D. Lyons, at Patrick D. Lyons MLB. So you can get all those updates from this Tiger series and the Padres series this weekend. Rockies Insider, go over to the YouTube channel. Make sure you follow along and subscribe to that. Appreciate everybody in the chat live over on YouTube, keeping the show going and rolling along, giving me that momentum, asking me those questions, those momentous questions. But as I like to say, when it comes to momentum, It can only be as good as my next show. So, of course, I will talk to you tomorrow.